Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where we talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Manifest. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, let's start off with the whole situation with Sanvi. Obviously, Sanvi is so desperate to kind of pick up her research that was stolen by the Major that she's willing to test it on herself because she feels like, obviously, much like Ben, she's rushing to try and find a solution to the death date situation. Obviously, she thought she did, but now she's trying to work backward through her research to see if, she needs... Initially, she was testing it, obviously, on animals, but now she's jumping to human trials because if she has to sacrifice herself, so be it, if it means finding a way to save everyone. But obviously, Ben's like, we can't do this without you, Sanvi, so don't sacrifice yourself to do that. Because at first, Ben's having a... calling about her, but then it turns out that calling wasn't about her. They were both having a calling about this boy named Theo, because they ended up tracking, because I love the fact of the matter is Ben was like, all right, if it's that row, it has to be Finn. And she's like, wait, you have all of them memorized? And he's like, yeah. And she's like, why am I not surprised? She's surprised? More like impressed. And I thought that was kind of a cute moment. Because I feel like out of anyone, Sanvi and Ben are the biggest partners throughout all this. I mean, granted, other people, obviously Grace has become a partner and all of that too. Michaela is often his partner, But it just seems like one of the earliest teams was Ben and Sanvi, interestingly enough. But nevertheless, Ben goes and visits Finn, but it turns out Finn's I don't actually have any kids. And the moment he mentions the one night stand, I'm like. And it's oh, this kid, this is the person we saw. It's that's a younger me. I'm like, you're a kid. You had a kid. And it's yeah, that was 5 years ago, so the kid would be about that age. And he goes back to Sanvi, and they ended up figuring that out. So, and obviously Sanvi was able to kind of narrow it down to figure out who was the lady that he slept with. And eventually they track her down and they meet her. But the whole complicated thing is she's married. And it turns out that time when her and Finn had slept together, she was married. So that's why she kind of disappeared afterwards. So now her husband has been living his life believing obviously oh, Theo's my son. And Theo's been thinking oh, that's my dad. And, obviously she wants to keep that a secret. But now there's a complicated thing because Finn's oh, I have a kid out there. I cannot get to know him. But it's if Finn does this, he's basically going to be destroying a family. And obviously he doesn't want to do that. But it's that's still my kid. I just want to get to know him. Just one meeting, that's all. But Ben's as a father, I know when you see him, you're going to have that instinct of you're not going to want to turn away. That's just that fatherly instinct that's going to kick in. And even then, when he does have that little meeting with Theo, it isn't enough. He's no, can we have a little bit more? Because he wants to try and, but for her, and you can't really blame her because it's a situation of she's just trying to preserve her marriage because it's something I did all those years ago, she didn't think much of it at the time because I think she never realized that Finn was an 8-2-8. She probably just thought hey, this is some random dude, whatever. It never has to come up, and now it's kind of in her face again. But so for her, she wants to try and protect her family. But it turns out Theo actually has what was I forgot what it was Sanvi was saying, but basically all the signs, the yellow in his eyes, was supposed to be the fact that he was nearing like a liver failure and stuff like that. So he's got was it liver or kidney? I can't remember. It might be either way. I'm terrible with this stuff. I'm already letting so much slip my mind. I'm sorry. But the fact of the matter is, they luckily take him in time. But obviously, his mom isn't a match, but Finn is, and because she feels bad because she's I literally turned him away from seeing his own son. But he was no, I wanted to give something to him, and now I can. He's I only need half of one anyway. So and he's I'll keep it anonymous, but she's no, you're saving my son's life, so you need to I need it to be known that you're the one that say you can be this way. You can be in his life. Because obviously they're not going through the whole thing of because they don't want to turn it to that whole complicated thing. He doesn't want to destroy a family, but at least this way he can be close to his son without really it becoming an issue. Being hey, you're being his friend. I'm hey, I gave you part of my organ and you're okay now. But obviously for Sanvi later on, that's an issue because it's because he has that organ, because of the organ transfer, maybe he got the marker. She's not fully sure how this whole situation works. Because obviously it's not something that's, I mean, even in a Grace situation, we don't 100% know if the marker was passed down to the baby, but it seems like it does, considering the fact is Grace is having, callings. That would mean that a lot of that passed down to the baby as well. But maybe the baby's circumstances are a little bit different. Like you might pass on the callings, but you would assume that's kind of written into the DNA of the marker as well. Maybe not. But I'm leaning more so in the more definite route. But I'm like, there could be a little more complexity with it. Like maybe only the callings went through, maybe not the marker. Well, no, because they did the whole test to find out that the baby did in fact have a marker, right? But I don't think you can. I mean, especially at this, like you'd have to wait for the baby to be born for them to be able to test that, right? Because I'm blanking on that. I don't think they've tested that. Regardless, like I said, I'm being stupid. I'm sorry. But, so there's that one side of things. Another side of things is the whole, obviously Michaela having a complicated thing of like, oh yeah, having your current boyfriend's ex, staying, which for her, she's like, well, Zeke literally dealt with the whole me and Jared situation, even went to jail for it. So it's like, I can put up with his ex. And he's like, yeah, it's like, yeah, Zeke, did he forget to tell you about him being married? Which I figured I was like, the fact is when Courtney was like, oh, I'm his wife. And the way Zeke kind of looks kind of annoyed, I'm like, I knew there was like more to that. Like maybe they weren't legally married or that they were split or something like, well, there was something to it, but it turns out they got high and came up with the thought of like, oh, we're going to get married, but they never filed the paperwork, so they were never legally married. And the fact of the matter is they broke up like a year before Zeke went in the woods and disappeared for that year, so there's that whole situation. So, but obviously for Michaela, it's still that complicated thing of like, yeah, it's kind of a weird, sucky situation, but, for her, she's trying to do her best because, like I said, Zeke kind of put up with her complicated situation. She's like, who am I not to complain? But I did like that Ben was like, yeah, that inflatable mattress, it does have a hole in it and stuff like that. Just, being a little vindictive. I love that. But the fact of the matter is, situation turns out, well, because at first there's good with this whole situation because Zeke is clean. He's trying to get Courtney clean. He's trying to help her out, trying to, make amends. And even Courtney had talked about it, like, like at the meeting about like how she has his ex who's with the new cop lady. But the fact of the matter is that they weren't good for each other. They kind of fed each other's addiction, and it was just it was a mess. Like, it's like, yeah, there was good, but it was drowned out by so much bad, But things get worse because Lucas, a drug dealer from their past, has come because he wants $20,000 from Michaela. But I mean, not Michaela, from Courtney, or she's gonna have to work for him. Obviously, Zeke is planning on, no, I'm gonna handle this situation. I'm going to make sure that this gets resolved, And it's like, well, she might go get drugs from someone else afterwards anyway. And he's like, yeah, but at the very least, I turn my back on my sister. I'm not going to make that mistake again. So he's and that's always, because the sad thing is that's always rattling off in Zeke's mind. He felt like he abandoned his sister and she died because of it, and so that guilt is eating him alive. And so on his path for making amends, he looks at Courtney, and that means of like, this is another person I turned my back on because we broke up and I just kind of went on my own way. But still, so Michaela goes undercover and they go to try and bust Lucas, which obviously he wants her to shoot up. I'm like, oh, how's this going to turn out? I was like, I don't think this is going to be good. But Zeke kind of gets in the way of it, being like, oh, she doesn't like needles. She's kind of like very like stuck up about stuff like that. And she's like, oh, I'm stuck up. I guess I'm not as much fun as your ex Courtney, and is like kind of turns it into a scene. It's like, fine, get out of here. But then the dude goes, I recognize you. Don't I recognize you? She's like, Michaela's like, nope. And he's like, yeah, you're an 828er. I was like, is it going to stop there? Yeah, and you're also a cop. It's like, ooh, the disadvantage of being super famous in a very bad way. That's a complicated mess of like, yeah, that's going to make undercover work super hard when literally your face is plastered all over the place of being like, hey, you're one of the many passengers that came back from, I mean, it's a pretty big event of like, oh, you came back on that flight that disappeared for 5 years? Oh yeah, you're super famous. Like your face is like going to be recognizable enough. I mean, obviously like Ben already has that complicated thing of like, oh yeah, our family being what it is, we're kind of in the spotlight a little bit anyway, but luckily everything ended with Lucas being taken down. So, and he's like, Lucas saying like, oh, you're a dead man, which he's like, yeah, Zeke was kind of like, yeah, I kind of already knew that. But by the time the whole, Lucas situation was dealt with, it come back and Courtney's gone. But, she did a little paper thing and it says like going to a sober, house. So it's like, maybe she'll get help. But for Zeke, it's like, I kind of did what I could do. Like, the fact is, I made amends, and the fact of the matter is, hopefully she does get help, but I can't live her life for her. Like, at the end of the day, it has to be her choice to want to get help, and it seems like maybe, hopefully she is. So it's kind of good, good came about that. But sadly, at the end, the whole Courtney had brought up some stuff about, like, yeah, Zeke, even though when he wants to get clean, he always has a backup plan that he stashes some pills around. One of those places was inside of, like, the hollowed out parts of, like, his razors. And, Michaela looks into it and sees that, which is, like, showing her that this, because Courtney was like, oh, the fact of the matter is he always made promises about it, but the fact of the matter is he seems like he's really going for it. And for Michaela, it's like, she kind of thinks of it more so as because he has such a limited amount of time. Like, obviously she's trying to be vague about it, being like, yeah, because you never know with life, we have a short amount of time, but it's like he literally has a short amount of time because they literally know when he's going to die in a couple months. So that he wants to live his life good, but it's still, regardless of all that, he's still an addict, and that's not going to be something you just quickly shake, especially this, his sobriety is still, it got interrupted, him going to jail and everything, and now, trying to, like, regardless, like, Zeke's got a lot of issues he has to work through, so sobriety's not going to be an easy thing. I mean, it never would be, but even more so under these circumstances. So there's that. Kind of circling back to the whole Ben situation really quickly, it's a whole complicated thing of, like, okay, so, like, some reporters wanted to do a news story on the Stone family because Grace is pregnant. They somehow found that out, but it's like, hey, first 828 baby, so that's a whole thing, which obviously Ben's like, no, we're just going to, like, avoid that. Like, we're just going to be two regular people having a baby. But then Grace thinks, she looks at the whole Finn situation and thinks, like, okay, like, that, I mean, technically it's an 828 baby, but technically it isn't, because that it happened before the 828 situation. Obviously, Ben and Grace's situation happened after the 828, so it doesn't count as an 828 baby. But it's like Theo is growing up believing his dad is someone else, not knowing that Finn is his dad. So Grace is considering doing that situation, making it so that they say that it's Danny's baby instead of Ben's. Which, that's a complicated thing. She, like, obviously it upsets Ben. She's like, no, it was just a thought. But for him, it's like, we'll protect the baby together. But it's like, you doing that might not be enough. Especially because, like, Grace had talked about it. It's like, this whole situation is putting a target on her baby's back. They've already had two callings about protecting the baby. But it's like, you have the Xers who are going to think of your baby as, like, some creature, maybe some abomination. Then you have the believers might look at your child as like, oh my God, your child is holy, might be the second coming type of situation. It could be something like that. So, like I said, extremes on both sides. So, but obviously, that's going to suck. Because, like, despite what you might feel about it, like, it might be the smart choice, but at the same time, it's like, it's still sucky because you have to be like, you have to pretend like you're raising someone else's child. You can't, like, this child will have to basically grow up believing that its dad is someone else. And, like, it's the inverse of Finn's situation. Like, no, we know this is our baby, but we're going to say it's someone else. It's a whole thing. So I'm really interested to see. I think we are going to be circling back to that. Whether Ben likes it or not, I think that idea is going to be circled back to, and we'll kind of have to see in the long run whether anything comes of that or not. Another element to this episode is TJ and Olive. We definitely see them growing closer over the course of this episode. Obviously, they've been spending a lot of time together. Obviously, Adrian kind of kicked them out of, her in particular. TJ can come back if you want to, but obviously, like, he's probably not going to do it as much without Olive there. But obviously, they're investigating the tarot cards, and they meet with a fortune teller, and she kind of points out that the card they have, the star card, is basically from a very old deck. And I forgot, what was it? Alziur, something like that. And it turns out it's actually, like, obviously something like very old school, way back in the day, like mythology type of stuff about a guy who disappeared for like 10 years and then came back, and he swore he could hear the voice of God. Now, obviously, this is just legends and stuff like that. None of this could be 100% verified, but because TJ was looking up, he's like, so it's like he was going for 10 years, so that meant his death date was in 10 years, but they never found out when he died. There's no date. So for them, it's like, there's no, okay, so what does that mean? So it's a situation of like, because Olive is trying to be positive about it. I mean, like, well, that means he could have lived for like 30 years, we don't know. But it's like, well, yeah, because we don't know, it could be the key to figuring out this whole death date situation. It could be like learning that, for one, it's a big leap of a good chunk of information to be like, this isn't the first time that's happened, which would make you assume, which begs the question, does that mean in general that this has happened before? Or are we talking just like ancient times this has happened? Or has it happened over the course of human history? And is that where we're going to start trailing this back to that, because obviously this has similarities to Lost. Like Lost kind of works in a similar vein too, that Lost goes, without going too deep into it, Lost, the island in particular, goes back a very, 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 very long time. So I'm wondering if they're going to do a similar thing where we start running through history and examples of like, all these people disappeared, but obviously maybe it got covered up and didn't really get looked into. I mean, it makes you start thinking about certain things like, well, what about Roanoke? People just randomly disappearing in that situation. It's like, maybe that's actually connected, and maybe they actually popped up later on somewhere. That might be something they don't end up connecting, but you can't help but kind of piece that together, because that's like one of those things in history where it's like a big mystery of like, oh, people disappearing. I mean, I doubt they'll do it connecting that, because I was also thinking like, oh, there might be some Bermuda Triangle stuff, and I'm like, no, that's probably like too out there. They probably wouldn't connect it to this. Like I said, I'm drawing probably too many correlations between all that, but it was just kind of all floating through my mind. So. But it is some interesting stuff, though, so is this potentially leading to a potential way to deal with the death date, or is this just kind of informing them, like I said, purely the fact is that maybe throughout history this has happened more than once, or like I said, maybe this is the one instance of history that happening. I highly doubt it. I think there's going to be other instances of it. Like I said, we'll have to wait and see. But at the end of the day, Olive trying to make, TJ feel better and kind of reading his fortune with the cards. It was super adorable, and cute. And they had their moment later on. Because obviously, like, Olive was kind of and I thought she took that well, like her dad kind of telling her not to go back. But, because I was almost halfway expecting her to kind of sneak off. I mean, there's always a possibility. But it's like, he tries to explain it to her, because the fact of the matter is, these people look at us like we're something that's not human, and that could be dangerous, because they look at us as like we're these, like I said, Grace's baby could be looked at as like a second coming type of situation, of like, oh, here's our Messiah or something. I don't trust Isaiah. Like, I got that inkling from him, because he was trying to be like, yo, how are we going to get more people to come back here if we don't have someone like her here to kind of, tell her story and kind of like her connection to those who the returned, which obviously, Adrian's like, oh, there'll be another miracle watcher. I'm like, what the hell does that mean? We'll get to that in a second. So, but she handled it a lot better. She was just kind of like okay with it. She kind of understood where her dad was coming from, but part of me still kind of like, because he stopped it for now, but that doesn't mean it's always going to be like that. I think Olive is going to get dragged back, most likely because Adrian might kind of force that situation. We'll see. But for now, it's like her and DJ, having that little picnic, the strawberry pie and everything. It was super adorable. So kind of glad that they, ended up finding each other through this situation. Because like for TJ, it's like, well, being being an 828er, it's like you don't really have anyone you can really talk to about that situation. Olive obviously being kind of steeped in this situation because obviously her dad, her aunt, and her brother being one, so she's one of the few people in the world who can really understand and won't look at him differently. Kind of just see him for himself, whereas other people, whether they are Xers, whether they are believers, will look at him as, oh yeah, you're an 828er, so there's that whole thing. Another angle to this whole episode is the whole Jarrett situation, because obviously home dude finds out about Jarrett. It's like, oh yeah, you were engaged to an Xer. Also, the haircut and everything was kind of a nice touch. Once again, like the way he handled that whole situation when he was like, yeah, stay away from me and my sister, but he was like, you want to know my experience? Yeah, I was engaged to Michaela, but what came back wasn't. He's going into the whole like diatribe about the whole thing of just being like, yeah, that's not her, that was something else, so she ruined my life, blah blah blah. I mean, granted, there's a speckle of truth to that. She kind of did screw things up. She did screw up his marriage and this whole complicated thing. She did choose Zeke over you. But more so than anything, it just cements it more in my mind of like, yeah, he's going undercover. Which once again makes me wonder, does their captain, does she know that? Is that why she shut Michaela down at every instance where Michaela's like, oh, I got this gut feeling? Is she just doing it just to be like, I don't want to listen to your stupid gut feeling? Or is she just doing that to preserve whatever it is that Jarrett's trying to do? I don't know. She's the one that kind of determines what Jarrett does. So like I said, this could be 100% on his own, but I feel like he would have some form of backing. So I don't know. We'll see. Because obviously things are kind of like, obviously he met the head honcho last episode. So now we're kind of continuing down that route of him getting deeper and deeper in with the exes. I'm sure that's going to get complicated, but we'll have to see. But then finally, obviously, Sanvi's like, no, I got to test this out because it's, because of this whole Theo situation, I think pushed her even more because she's like, yeah, we saved his life, but maybe we doomed him at the same time because maybe, like I said earlier, the transplant might have given him the death day thing as well because it might have given him like the 828 marker. But nevertheless, as she's about to inject herself, her, Ben, and Michaela end up having this specific calling. Because earlier Michaela got it, but she thought it was snow, like being reflective of Zeke. But it ended up being, and the moment I saw it fall, I was like, it's not snow, it's ash. And then like they end up on the plane, but it's like the charred remains of the plane and there's dead bodies everywhere. And so I was like, that's once again, my brain immediately, before we kind of continue, I was like, okay, because I've kept thinking like every time they end up back on a plane, I'm like, what ended up happening is they crashed and they died. Like either my mind was either that the fact is that it created, there was an alternate, like they kept seeing like what was going to happen. Maybe it's a thing of like they're perpetually in a state, like maybe they're about to crash and time froze and then something generated copies. So maybe they aren't these real versions of themselves. Maybe this is their consciousness, but they're in fake bodies. Like, so maybe there is some truth to maybe what the extras believe them not being themselves, but maybe there is some truth to that. That's kind of a thought I had. Like I said, we're way out there theory. But now with this, it makes me think, okay, so maybe it's not about like, oh, this is what actually happened to him, or this is what's happened, they were in the process of happening to him. What it's most likely suggesting, because they were like, well, these are some of the 828 passengers, but some of them weren't people in the plane, some were, because obviously we saw Finn, for example, so that's someone that was. But the fact is, if you notice, he has that green frog rock in his hand. I'm like, that was something Theo had. So it's like, this calling is warning about the future, that basically some plane is going to have 828ers as well as non-828ers on it, and it's going to crash. That's what this has all been about. So maybe the calling has been like going back, kind of, maybe this calling is a combination of letting you know, like, oh, you got to save the passengers, but also be weary of this future. Because notice who was on the outside, Adrian. So it's like, it's interesting that he would have this calling. Is this his first calling, or has he had others? The fact is that he was there. Now, maybe it's not 100% suggesting like Adrian's having this calling. Maybe it's suggesting him being there is more so like maybe they didn't recognize that he was outside because he's having the calling as well. Or it could be that because he's the cause of this. Now I start thinking about Isaiah becoming obsessed with them and stuff like that. And especially what did Adrian say, the next miracle. So it could be a thing that Adrian or someone obsessed, believer, tries to orchestrate the same thing. Much like the pilot last season trying to repeat the conditions of, the 828 situation. So maybe it's similar in this regard, kind of getting 828ers and trying to make a miracle out of it, but it ends up in failure, ends up killing a lot of people. So the question then becomes like, is Adrian the one that sets this up, either because he kind of pushes his followers so much that they believe this? Does he set it up because he wants to kind of be the hero at the end of the day to save the day, but maybe by doing so, kind of trying to be our final destination, like, oh no, this plane, something terrible is about to happen. Oh, I was able to save everyone. Like I said, I'm throwing out wild theories, but like I said, it's no longer like, oh, this is something like that in particular, the ash, the plane and everything. That's a future event that the calling's kind of warning them about. So I'm interested to see ultimately what that all ends up turning out to be. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.